Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anna. I'm a clinical psychology doctorate student and I make videos about real life applications to psychology, so please hit like and subscribe if you want to see more of that. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the psychology of daddy issues and my issue with this concept and using Cassie from Euphoria as an example of daddy issues, and then I'm going to just wrap it up with some conclusions about the topic. So, surprisingly found not as much research as I thought I would on the concept of daddy issues. In psychology, obviously, it's not a very professional term to use. It's often conflated with father absence, which is, one of the things that daddy issues refers to sometimes, which is the dad being absent from the child's life. In the olden days, it was also called a father complex. So this is kind of the fancy old-timey way of saying daddy issues. And obviously, father absence specifically is a very topical topic because the number of single mother homes is increasing greatly in the US, with more than 1 in 4 American children having an absent father in their lives. So father absence is clearly an issue that we need to start paying a lot more attention to, and I think the culture of being an absentee father is also getting very prevalent, especially with online. It's becoming very common to kind of laugh at or encourage abandoning one's paternal responsibilities. So that's something that's not great as well. There is definitely a negative association between living apart from a biological father and multiple domains of the offspring's well-being, such as education, mental health, family relationships, and labor market outcome. So I found some pretty concerning statistics, which are that a child is 4 times more likely to live in poverty if he has an absent father, which makes sense because of course it's a 1-income household instead of 2. They're more likely to have behavioral problems. They're 2 times as likely of having infant mortality. They are more likely to go to prison. They're more likely to commit a crime. They're 7 times more likely to have teen pregnancy. They're more likely to face abuse and neglect, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. They're 2 times more likely to suffer obesity, 2 times more likely to drop out of high school. So clearly an absent father has some pretty terrible outcomes, although I'd have to know if there are any extraneous variables that were controlled for in these statistics, such as socioeconomic status or the neighborhood where a person lives, because I would imagine those also play a huge role in whether an absent father results in negative outcomes. So what about the relational consequences of having an absent father? So it can lead to fear of abandonment, constant validation seeking in relationships, a feeling of rejection or being unlovable, trust issues with men. And according to Dr. Linda Nielsen, who is a doctor of education, not psychology, so take this with a grain of salt, she says there are 5 types of daddy issues. So the first one is you rarely felt loved or respected or accepted by your dad growing up. The second one is when you did feel loved or respected, you had to earn that love or respect. The third one is when you failed at earning that respect, he made you feel as if you were unloved or unlovable. The fourth one is you were not allowed to express anger or disagreement with your dad. And the last one is the dad conveyed the message that a man must solve a woman's problems, this Prince Charming notion. So again, I'm not sure how much validity there is to this 5 types of daddy issue system. I assume a lot of it is anecdotal evidence. It seems reasonable to me, but I would just have to know if these are actual categories that people fall into, because we can research what the kind of clusters or patterns of daddy issues are. So I have a couple huge issues with the notion of daddy issues. So one thing is that it's a term that's usually used to ridicule or shame people for something that is out of their control. So we don't get to control who our parents are or what type of parents they are. So why are we mocking people for having a negative psychological outcome because of something they cannot control? And although this is something that's mostly reserved for shaming women now and for belittling them in their romantic relationships with partners, it is relevant to all genders and not just to people who are attracted to men. Men with father complexes tend to struggle with approval and self-worth, while women tend to yearn for protection and validation. And what about gay men? Since they have relationships with men too, wouldn't they therefore also have daddy issues in relationships? And another major flaw with the concept of daddy issues is that what about the mother? So a mother's absence can be just as damaging, if not more, but mothers are less likely to abandon their children, and when they do, in the rare cases when they do, they're extremely demonized for it. So I would imagine that the consequences of mother absence are possibly even worse. And yet we don't really ever talk about mommy issues because this is so clearly something used to frame women in relationships with men as crazy or irrational or damaged. And when I was looking at, do mommy issues exist, Freud's Oedipal complex showed up. And if you don't know what that is, I envy you so much. The Oedipal complex was basically this theory that boys want to have sex with their mom and that they become really angry towards their fathers for having that kind of relationship with their mom. I know, I feel really bad for Freud's mom too. And that is a really good example of mommy issues, and the Electra complex is kind of the parallel for that towards women. So the Electra complex is girls wanting that with their fathers, which is kind of the equivalent of daddy issues. So clearly, I just want to emphasize this before we go into the case of Cassie from Euphoria. Daddy issues are not women who have a certain sexual preference, and not all or most women who have issues in romantic relationships also have an issue with their father's relationship. That is not the sole thing that we can attribute romantic relationship issues to. So now that we have that straight, let's go into the case of Cassie. So one of the first things that we hear about Cassie's dad is that he was handsome and that her mom would get mad at him for flirting with other moms. And then this is also a really good example of why do we call them daddy issues and not mommy issues too, because Cassie's mom is clearly kind of an alcoholic. So we put way too much influence on the role of men. I mean, yes, a father is very important to a childhood's upbringing, but there are a lot of really incredible women who are single parents. And on the flip side, moms who aren't that great can also have a really detrimental effect on the child. And then when Cassie's parents split, her mom says, "I just think he didn't want the responsibility of being a father," which is not entirely true because he was struggling with very serious addiction. Heroin is no joke, and possibly the infidelity of his wife as well. And so then Cassie starts seeing him less and less. So he's less and less responsive, he visits less and less. Then he has his DUI and he's in the ICU for 23 days. And then when she sees him the next time, he comes asking for money. He's clearly a heroin addict. He takes some things from the house. And then we learn that Cassie kind of has this pattern of the original unrequited love for her dad. So she repeats that pattern in subsequent romantic relationships with men. Rue narrates, she fell in love with every guy she ever dated. And every guy that she ever dated wanted a sex tape. And then they also used it as revenge porn, which was obviously terrible for Cassie. And it just kind of shows this pattern of never got that validation and that acceptance and that support from her dad towards the end of her childhood. And this is possibly part of the reason why she has these patterns in her romantic relationships. And she's trying to find someone who she trusts, trying to find someone who treats her with respect. And she kind of falls for every boyfriend that she ever has because she just wants someone to fall in love with her back. So here's the bottom line when it comes to daddy issues. Of course, having an absent or toxic father can cause really bad psychological issues. This is absolutely not surprising since we often hear about the importance of parenting and upbringing on child's later outcomes, not only relationally and psychologically, but also in terms of crime, incarceration, and physical health as well. Daddy issues are not something that only applies to women and is only relevant in their romantic relationships. They also affect men, and they also affect the wide sphere of well-being besides just who you're dating. And mommy issues are also a real issue, although it's much less common of a phenomenon for mothers to abandon their children, and it's seen as much more severe when they do. So I want to really highlight that we should never use the term daddy issues as some reason to ridicule people for having difficulties in their relationship or for having a difficult relationship with their father or an absent father. But we do need to focus on decreasing the rate of father absence because that is a very real issue these days with very severe consequences. So let me know what you think. I want to know if you believe in daddy issues, if you think it's an offensive term like me, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you on Saturday.